So you remember that time that we realized that our supplement wasn't what we thought it was, Jake? That was fun.
Yeah, yeah. Fun, maybe fun, but also maybe not so fun.
It wasn't that fun. In fact, it was kind of embarrassing, but we learned a thing or two, and we're here to tell that story today. So I'm Jason. I'm one of the co-founders of Aero Supplements.
I'm Jake, also a co-founder of Aero Supplements.
And what we learned throughout this whole process was that there's a lot wrong with the supplement industry, and we're here to fix it. So where would you say this party started?
I mean, yeah, we all have a shared interest in health and wellness, passion for kind of, being as healthy as we possibly can. And I think that like that convergence of that shared interest is kind of what led us to think that we could start a supplements company. I think also like we kind of started as like dissatisfied consumers. Like I don't think collectively there wasn't really a brand that like resonated with all of us, right?
Yeah,
Out
I think
there.
we're of the generation that believes that, we want to avoid pharmaceuticals and surgical things and stuff like that. Not that we don't believe in it, not that we're not like, someone will just heal us without medical intervention, but that so much of what you can do today can be taken care of, say naturally, right? With like good sleep, exercise, sauna, cold plunges, eating well, doing things with your friends. And that is a lot of how I think we approach life, like our group of founders approaches life. And we were looking for a brand that embodied those values. And like in particular, you and I have had many conversations because you've taken supplements, I've taken supplements, and that question always came up early on. Hey, what brand do you recommend? And like what would I typically say? Do you remember my answers for that?
I don't think you were able to offer reliably offer a brand for any given like it would vary depending on what supplement.
Yeah, my eyes would glaze over. And that's exactly, and like who wants to have, like if I were to be like, what kind of car do you recommend? Like I'd be like, oh, I love Porsches or like whatever, right? Like people just like know like here's the thing, right? And but like for or if you're like, hey, like what kind of runners should I get? Like people just like know the brand. But supplements, it was always like, well, there's this purpley one that it's kind of hard to remember what it's called, but if you go to the certain thing and like you look on this section, you'll find it. And then inevitably what would happen is I'd make a recommendation to a friend, and because people would often come to me for this kind of thing and then come back with the wrong thing. That would happen all the time. I'd be like, go get magnesium bisglycinate. They'd be like, awesome, yeah. And they'd show up with like magnesium like citrate. They're like, oh, my stomach hurts. This is weird. I'm like, well, that's because you got the wrong one.
Yeah.
And that would always happen. So that was always like an issue with the brands that we were recommending. And so part of our idea was to make a very distinguishable, beautiful, memorable brand that had super high quality, but also wasn't like super expensive because why should wellness, nice wellness, like quality wellness actually cost a ton? So that was our idea.
Yeah, I mean
And
that was sort of like I think like probably the largest impetus was that like there didn't exist a brand that we were all like comfortable or like happy to keep on our bathroom counter or in our on our kitchen counter, and like a brand that really like understood efficacy but also like I don't know, was well designed, right?
yeah, so that was the idea. That was the starting point. So how did we get to that oh crap moment? What was the oh crap?
The oh crap moment for when we found out our supplements weren't what they were told
Yeah, because I think
to be.
people probably want to hear that, right? So I think that was like in an email. It was I remember, and if we kind of go back in time, we started with one supplement, and the idea was to start with magnesium bisglycinate. We all take magnesium bisglycinate, and it was recommended to us. It really helped my sleep. It helped with muscle cramping. How? What do you notice?
Yeah, just like for me, it was sleep, which is kind of one of the reasons we chose to start with magnesium too. Is because like you can really feel the effects after taking it right away. Like it's just something or at least in our experience, we notice it right away, which isn't true of all supplements and all minerals you take.
So we started with magnesium bisglycinate because that was one of those ones where there was like one brand that like we sort of recommended, but then people would often go to the store and get a different brand. And magnesium's just so good for you. It was like a growing market, and it was also one that I don't think's ever going away. It wasn't
Yeah,
some sort of like trend that's going to come and then go. So we're like, let's start with magnesium bisglycinate. Let's do one product, just one, and let's make it really good. And we'll start there. We'll see if our idea even works because we didn't know for sure. The vision is to build out all supplements, research-based and single ingredient and pure. But let's start with one. Let's start with one that we know well. That should be easy, right? That was kind of the key thing. And then like we were really focused on the value, right, Jake? Like you were talking a lot about that.
Yeah, I think value was important to us. Like I said before, a well-designed but like value-driven brand, and like the like one concept that we developed across a number of conversations was the idea of like cost per effective dose.
Yeah, yeah. Because it seemed like there was companies that had more value than others and like played tricks like on others with like the amount of elemental magnesium versus the powder of the magnesium. So we can get into all of that. And I guess that's like a good place to go deep, which is that magnesium bisglycinate is actually a powder. It's a powder, and what it is, it's a molecule of both magnesium and two glycine molecules that are attached to the magnesium. So the magnesium amount in, let's just say, 1,000 milligrams of magnesium bisglycinate might only be about 13 to 20% depending on the type of magnesium, and this is something we'll get deep into. And so what we noticed was that there was companies that would play tricks on labels where they would say, yeah, we have 1,000 milligrams of magnesium bisglycinate powder, but there was really only 200 or 120 or 150 grams of magnesium. Or they also do things where they'll say 200 grams per serving, but it's really the two capsules. And so supplement companies were basically ripping people off or playing tricks to say that they had more magnesium than they didn't. And this was something that we thought was baloney, and we wanted to have a very clear company that had more value than.
Yeah, and like they would label it like 100% pure. Meanwhile, it's like blended with a ton of oxide. And just yeah, like really like obscure, like a lot of obscurity for magnesium specifically, it seems.
Yeah, and that was the next part of it, which got very interesting. And this is where it led to where the supplement was what it wasn't. Where we got very focused on oxide because when you research, you'd listen to our faves, Dr. Rhonda Patrick and lots of different people, and they would say, magnesium bisglycinate or the salts are or not salts, the organic types of magnesium are much, much better than the inorganic, which it would be like magnesium oxide. And the reason being,
Bioavailable.
Sorry?
Bioavailable.
Yeah, like more bioavailable. And so the magnesium oxide specifically actually causes some GI, discomfort and, can lead to farting and bloating and loose stools, shall we say. And so you kind of want to avoid it, right?
Yeah.
And what we noticed was that there were some companies that were saying, oh yeah, we have 200 milligrams of magnesium bisglycinate. But then you flip the label around at the very back, it would say blended with magnesium oxide, or it would say like oxide in very small letters, right? And what that we found that to be a little bit misleading because we thought, hey, like, I thought we were trying to avoid oxide. But what ended up happening was there was other companies that took it a step further, and they said, hey, we're actually pure bisglycinate. And this is where, when we got into production, it was quite an interesting journey, right? So what happened was we were trying to do the specs for our initial order. We were saying, hey, we need to do 200 milligrams of magnesium bisglycinate and 200 milligrams being the magnesium component of that. And that comes from about 980 or 1,000-ish milligrams of the powder, right? And when we were doing the specs, we actually first started thinking, hey, we want to have around 120 milligrams of magnesium bisglycinate in each capsule. And that seemed like a good idea. But then we saw those other brands that were 100% pure. They had 200 milligrams of magnesium bisglycinate, and it was completely pure. The issue with that was that we went to our supplier and we said, "Hey, can we do that?" And they said, "Absolutely, we can do that." But we found out later that that
We're
wasn't.
like, oh, great, fantastic.
Yeah, and so what they did was they just produced a certificate of analysis from the raw material supplier that said, "Hey, this is pure bisglycinate. There's just bisglycinate in here, and it's
Yeah,
20% magnesium." And at first, I do remember scratching my head and being like, "Huh, I didn't know that that was possible. I thought it wasn't possible, but I didn't really think too much of it because there's this thing called a certificate that was certifying it."
yeah.
Did you think much
Like,
of it then?
no, because it was a certified document, a declaration by this company that the contents of what they were providing were what they said they were.
Yeah, and I think this is a good time to segue or kind of take that little side journey into a conversation I had with my uncle, who's like a quality analyst for companies, like auditor for quality in like any sort of supply chain. And he said to me, he said, I did a lot of audits or quality audits on supplement companies, and he said, you really got to be very careful with your manufacturers. And I said, oh, okay, well, what should we do? And we'd already thought we were doing a good job, and like, these people seem trustworthy. I'm thinking they're certified, they're good to go. But then my uncle is like, yeah, you gotta check everything. I was like, well, what do you recommend? And he says, well, you need the certificate of analysis from every bit of raw material. You need to be there for production. You need to like have samples of every material. And I said, okay, got it. Interesting. So then I took notes. I sent an email to the manufacturer. And do you remember what happened?
What happened?
I got an email back a bit later from their CEO of the whole manufacturing company.
Yeah.
And they go, I'd like to have a meeting with you. And I said, okay, great. And I meet with them, and they're like, and they started. He does a great job. He goes, what are your goals? What are your dreams? Like, we're really excited to grow together. And then he goes, so one last thing at the end of the meeting. And I go, yes, what is that? He says, you're asking for a lot of things that most companies don't ask for. And I'm like, okay. And he says, why don't you trust us? And I
Yeah,
say,
you're saying like asking for a lot of things is in like we just have a lot of questions about.
no, like I'm talking about the standards that we ask for. So the certificates of
Yeah.
analysis to have the
Yeah, but
samples.
it's not like we were asking them like asking for a lot in that like we were asking them to like give us bottled unicorns or something.
No, we were
Like
not
like
asking for bottled
some
unicorn.
basic some basic what we believe to be some basic things like a certificate of analysis which should just exist anyways.
Yes. And so then he was like, I'd just like to know, like, why don't you trust us and the team? And I was like, no, like, I wouldn't be paying you money to manufacture our product if I didn't trust that you guys were going to do a great job. But he was like, well, you're asking all these questions. I was like, well, we're like, yeah, but it's like trust but verify. And like, this is part of quality assurance. And I would expect other brands to want to do this. And he was like, no, we've never been asked these questions before. And I was
Yeah.
like,
And you
huh.
were shocked. You're like, "Oh,
I was like, I guess that's interesting. I was like, are we doing something wrong? I don't know. It's a pretty big co-manufacturer. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Like, I don't necessarily think they're a bad actor. I think it's just emblematic of the standards of the industry and just what's expected.
yeah, that's just par for the course."
Yeah, and fortunately, we've found other people to work with and that have high standards, and it's working in partnership, right? That we'll get there, but
Yeah.
that was the conversation, and I mean, it's so funny what you think of in the like what that means for the industry. If this manufacturer was offended, they were offended that we were asking for these, I don't know, what do you call them? Checks, like this quality assurance.
Yeah.
And what does that mean for the whole industry?
Yeah, I mean that's fairly representative of what's happening. That's why like it doesn't surprise you like I think it was something like Cambridge Health Sciences is like a offshoot of like Harvard Medical School found that like some 70 to 80% of supplements aren't what they say they are, in terms of like the label not matching, what's in the bottle of the supplements. I think
Yeah.
that's like the discussion that we just had is kind of good representation of how that can happen or why that can happen.
Yeah, and like you are the big Health Canada guy, and Health Canada doesn't really factor in here.
Yeah, I think there might be some misconception around like what is actually required of a supplements company, general public, which is that there's not actually any like regulatory oversight on the verification of the contents of what's being sold. Rather, it's the verification that what is being sold does what it says it does. Right? So Health Canada regulates kind of what you can claim magnesium does. So we don't claim, for example, that magnesium has you grow wings and you can fly wherever you want to fly, because Health Canada regulates that, and that's all regulated. But what they don't regulate is that what's in the bottle is magnesium, and that's kind of I guess a gap in kind of the current regulatory framework used by Health Canada to kind of monitor the market.
Well, maybe we got to probably catch up on the rest of the story now because a supplement brand is in fact accountable to like saying what's in the bottle is in the bottle, but in theory, but in practice, it just
Yeah.
happened. Because here's what happened next to us, right? We go and we produce our run of the 200 milligram bisglycinate because our manufacturer said, here's a COA, here's a certificate of analysis that says 20%. We can pack 1,000 milligrams of magnesium bisglycinate powder into your capsules. Bingo, bango, bongo. You've got 200 milligrams per capsule.
We were stoked. We were stoked.
We were exhilarated. We're like, this is great.
Hallelujah.
We are fulfilling our vision. We are bringing value to the masses. We are bringing clarity. We are bringing purity where it's in a beautiful bottle. So we placed the order. The order came. We hit the road. We got sold lots of bottles. We went around town. We went around to the community. We met with different retailers, and we got ourselves into a bunch of retailers, local retailers, a lot of wonderful people that supported us being local. We started going. It was very exciting.
And then what happened?
Well, we started getting feedback, and even from the get-go, we got feedback from retailers, some retailers. They were like, oh, I didn't think that 200 milligrams was possible in a capsule. And we're saying, no, it's possible. Like, here's the COA. And they were like, okay, interesting. And like, we thought that COA was legit and it was a real thing. And so, now let's get to the science of it, which is that in a magnesium bisglycinate powder, based on the atomic weight of the two glycine molecules bound to the magnesium atom, the maximal amount of magnesium that can be in that compound is about 13.9% or something, so 13-14%-ish. And what happened was we were showing like 20%. And from the COA that said it was 100% pure. But the issue was that it wasn't like from a chemical, like molecular perspective, like a stoichiometry perspective, it was not possible. And that's what our customers seemed to know, or some retailers and some customers seemed to know. And so they'd email us and they'd ask us that, and we would send them the certificate of analysis. And I don't think they went as deep as we did. Like, I don't think they fully like knew what was going on, but they just could sense something was off. Yeah. And so they would ask and they'd say, well, it just doesn't seem like possible. No one gave like a clear reason why. But I don't know, and I don't know why they trusted us to do this, because there's a bunch of other brands that have 200 milligrams of pure bisglycinate. They're still in the market today. You can look them up. Just go on Amazon. And they sent us something. I think maybe it's because we were kind of like authentic and founder facing and talking to the community, and they sent us notes and they said, hey, look, we're not sure if this is possible. Can you look into this? So we did.
Yeah.
I think that had us stand out, and we're going to see if we earned the trust back. And so we did look into it. And we go back to our manufacturer and we say, hey, this is a concern. This does actually seem like a concern because there is about 13-14% seems to be the maximum amount. So where does this other 7% come from?
How is this happening? And then
Yeah.
didn't you like ask like, can you share with us like the test method used to determine the 20%?
Oh, that was later. That came later once we got a bit even smarter.
Right.
The or maybe less stupid. I don't know, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah. Less
was
stupid.
we started with just like where did that 7% come from? And I had been using ChatGPT thoroughly to get, and I kept asking a question. I was like, how could this be? And then what was funny was we're researching heavily trying to figure this out. And then they responded with, I'm very sure, a ChatGPT answer, because it was the same thing that ChatGPT told me, which is like maybe it was like loss on drying or something, blah blah blah. And I was like, I still don't think that's legit. So that, but finally, and this is where we get to that email where we get, I think it was a Friday afternoon. Was it a Friday afternoon? We're sitting around the
It
office.
was, yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And we got an email. It was about another product, even. And do you have that email handy, Jake?
Yeah. I can find it. Let me grab it.
And it was something like, hey, we're excited about this other product, blah, blah, blah. By the way, your pure magnesium was actually 14% oxide. Very excited to work with you on the next product.
Yeah.
No mention of an apology, nothing like that. Did you find it there?
Let's see here. Yeah, we've since exchanged a number of emails with these folks, so it's
Yeah.
hard to find.
Well, when you find it, I think the key thing from that was that shook our world, because we're like, oh no, like what have we done? Because we went to market with this idea of being pure and open and transparent and honest, and then it turns out that our label was incorrect. And fortunately, the ingredient that it was magnesium oxide, and because it was or because magnesium oxide is a safe thing that is often in a lot of other supplements, there was nothing dangerous. We didn't need to do anything extreme like issue public notices and blah blah blah. Everything was safe, but it did mean that we had a missing just an ingredient that wasn't listed, and that ingredient was magnesium oxide. Did you find it there, Jake?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Like you said, it was amongst like a separate conversation for a different product altogether. And like in the middle of the email, just randomly dropped in. Oh yeah, by the way, as for the magnesium, our supplier got back to us. They mentioned that the magnesium has 14% magnesium oxide present. And this is after like what, 100 times of double checking with them saying, so just make sure we're doing this without oxide, right?
Probably about 2 to 3. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. And there's an email chain actually from like very early on, which was I sent them an email. I said, because remember I said we're gonna do 120, which turns out we'll get to wouldn't have been pure either, even though it seemed pure, but it wouldn't have been pure. But we said to them, hey, there's this other company, or there's actually a couple other companies that are at 200 milligrams. Is it possible to remain at pure bisglycinate and hit that number too? And they said, yes. Here's the COA, right? So here it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was where we found out what went wrong.
Yeah. We were not happy with what seemed to be a little bit too casual a reference to the product not being what they sold us.
Yeah, yeah, and and then the other part that really was like I found this upsetting was that they once they found out that we identified this and we identified it as a problem, they were very just casual about it, like you said, and we're just kind of like, yeah, 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 it's okay. Well, we said, we talked to our lawyers to figure out what we were supposed to do in this situation. We'd never gone through anything like this. And he said, well, you can just stop selling it. But when you stop selling a product, it is technically called a level one recall,
Yeah,
correct?
that's right. Yeah, it's a level 1 recall. So, but yeah, by virtue of stopping selling the product, it's considered by definition a recall. It's a bit of a misnomer, the term recall, because people think of actually like hauling the product back in, issuing a notice to end consumers saying, hey, don't take the product or don't use the product that you bought, right? But they only do that when there's a serious safety risk or concern.
Yeah.
So in our case, it was level one because there was no safety concern or any risk to the consumer. Um, but yeah, by virtue of stopping selling the product, it's considered a recall.
Yeah, so we did that. But then our manufacturer, they said they were like they went they were real quick to go, "Oh no, you don't need to do a recall. You can just amend the NPN and just add in that other ingredient and everything will be fine." And
Yeah.
we probably could have, like, and probably not too many people would have noticed, but I feel like the people that would have noticed would have been our true customers, right? And
Yeah.
that was definitely not what we wanted to do. It just didn't feel right. But again, it seems to just like talk to the standards of the industry. And I don't know, maybe this just happened to happen with us this one time, maybe on our first go round. But it's like from a group that's like really trying their best to hit that snag on the very first time, it's kind of
Yeah.
odd.
Well, when we started, we thought like when we first discovered this issue, we thought like, oh, are we unlucky? And then through the course of our
Yeah,
further
fair.
investigation, we determined that it's just this is a reflection of the standard of the industry.
Probably not unlucky. Probably just this what happened.
Yeah, and I think like another good example of that too is wasn't there like eventually when we continued exploring alternative options for co-manufacturers and speaking with our co-manufacturers suppliers, didn't you mention that at one point like when we questioned a COA that was sent from a supplier that they simply said, "Oh yeah, our apologies, that was a clerical error," and then resubmitted like a totally different COA for the same material?
Yeah, it was something like that.
Like,
Oh
didn't that like what
God,
happened?
yes, I remember that
Yeah.
one actually.
This is
But
like isn't this like this was a supplier like presumably is supplying for many supplement companies, no?
yeah, that is true. And maybe I'll like tie it off for those that don't know. We when we found this out, we issued the recall, we talked to Health Canada, we communicated to all of our customers and all of our retailers. We let them know what happened, and we issued a refund to all of them and refunded the full product costs and let them know what happened and owned our mistake and owned what happened because we just thought we should live or die by that standard right, like if the market does not want a supplement company to be honest with them about what happens, then we should not exist, and that
If that's
then
the case, then we will definitely lose.
we will lose.
We will lose.
We will cease to exist because we're going to keep being honest, and if the market does not like that and does not support it by not buying our products, then we will go away. But we are here if people like that and they want to buy our products. Um, we will be here to help with that. We're very excited about doing that with what we're doing going forward. But yeah, when
Yeah.
you devised a pretty clever scheme, which was as we were trying to figure this out, you were like, let's email a bunch of other manufacturers and ask them if they can get the same specs or not, or at least if
Yeah.
they would promise us the same things.
Yeah, like that was like so as soon as we figured out that okay, there are folks in this industry who don't operate to the standard that we want to operate in terms of the supplements that we're selling in the market. It became a sort of a litmus test for us to request of co-manufacturers a product that we knew essentially cannot exist.
Yeah, so we messaged a bunch of manufacturers, and again, I don't like hold them individually to a fault. I don't think anyone's intentionally misleading anything. And I'll explain why. Because we asked them, can you get us a 200 milligram pure, no oxide magnesium? And we had a few come back and they were like, yes, we can. And I would say,
Sure.
awesome. Can we see the COA, a certificate of analysis? And they'd send me the COA. And this gets into your story about the clerical error. And they'd send me the COA and it would say, yep, 20% pure, no mention of oxide, nothing.
Yeah.
And we were like, all right, you guys are like, and it's actually not the co-manufacturer. It should be their responsibility and accountability to vet their raw material suppliers. But it's whoever this raw material supplier is that's just sending them the stuff and then just like labeling that COA what it is. But yes, there was, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but one of the COAs, I pointed out something on it, and then they just said, oh yeah, clerical error. There is this in it, and I can't remember what it was. And then on the next day, I got a new email with a new COA. It was
That is
I was like,
wild.
huh, that's interesting that you can just make a certificate of analysis just change like that. That's weird.
Yeah. Something that you think like is certified and has been validated with like a standard QA process. Nope. And in particular, was it not the like the purity of the raw materials being supplied? Like it literally just it went from 20% to like 14. No,
Yeah, something like that. It was something like that. It's kind of hard to
that's
remember
baffling.
all these little things, but that's what had us. That's actually what had us find our new co-manufacturer because they said to us, "We don't think that's possible to hit that number. I think it's only possible to hit, 13 to 14%." And
Yeah.
we said, "I like that you're honest with us, and we shall work with you."
Yeah. Yeah.
So that
You know
was,
what you're doing.
yeah,
You know what
yeah,
you're doing. We want to work with you.
yeah. So they're wonderful. They're wonderful people. So that's where we now get to creating our next order, which
Yeah.
is you would think that, oh yeah, like we figured it out, the mistake happened. Let's just not repeat it. Let's do something different and fix it. Well, the story has just begun, really, on trying to figure out how to create a magnesium bisglycinate that's pure, because the next part gets really interesting. So what was our next step? Once we started, we knew who to work with. I think that the next thing was we wanted to really just make sure it was pure, right?
Well, from a really basic standpoint, make sure that what we were telling people the supplement was is what we say it is.
Yeah, so just going to another level to test the raw material. So we came up with this idea.
And we knew that we needed to have additional intervention throughout the process to make sure that was the case.
And I think, yeah, that was the key thing was we realized that the certificate of analysis cannot be trusted. It is just a Word document created
Yeah.
by someone. And this is the thing that really fools the whole industry. And this is why we
Some
talk
guy
about,
named Phil can just like, yeah, they want to change the number, re-sign it, send.
well, this comes back to the Health Canada thing, which is that as long as the raw material supplier has a certificate of analysis that says there's something in it, the co-manufacturer just takes that certificate of analysis and then applies that to everything else downstream. So they then create their own certificate of analysis once they've done the microbial and heavy metals test. And then that is required by Health Canada. But there is no actual check to see if the raw material supplier, or sorry, the microbial and heavy metal test, like that is independently lab tested. That would be a huge breach if a company didn't do that and didn't store those records and like have that in play, and like someone were to die, that would be a huge, or get very sick or whatever, that would be a huge breach.
Yeah.
But there's no one checking, and it's not required, and the co-manufacturer doesn't do it because it's expensive to actually check that the validity of the COA. Is the raw material what the COA says it is? That is the part that is missing.
Yeah.
And so we thought, okay, here's how this will never happen again. Is if we test the raw material. That seemed like, oh, this should be a straightforward thing, right? Not such a straightforward thing.
No, it's not.
Not such a straightforward thing. So here we are saying, let's test this raw material, magnesium bisglycinate. This is one of the most popular magnesium supplements taken. It's recommended by our favorite Dr. Rhonda Patrick. It's recommended by so many lovely people. And guess what? There's no test to validate what is magnesium bisglycinate. You might hear me say that and say, oh, no, Jason, that is a silly thing to say. So to be clear, you can test the total amount of magnesium in magnesium bisglycinate.
Yeah.
But you can't actually validate what type of magnesium it is. It could be magnesium from oxide, from citrate, from bisglycinate. You don't know. You just don't know. And what we realized was that so many of these tests that were validating that there was magnesium was just validating that there was magnesium content, not the form of the magnesium.
Yeah.
So not only were the certificates of analysis just a made up thing, But even people that were trying to say they were pure and were actually trying to be like the high quality people, there was no way of testing.
Yeah, we're doing so without a way to actually validate that,
There's
essentially.
no way. And so we actually had to work over weeks with testing companies to say, hey, like, can we create a test for this? We tried different ways to do that. And they were saying, yeah, like, we don't have a test for that. Like, I would go, they'd say, yeah, we can test for magnesium. And I'd say, yes, but I want magnesium bisglycinate specifically. They said, no, we don't have a test for that. So we finally did find a tester that could use it's an NMR, like spectroscopy something or other, which basically measures the molecule vibrations of our sample,
Yeah.
and could actually generate a purity measurement. But what's really interesting, and this is something everyone should know about supplements, is you have what's called the USP, which is the United States Pharmacopoeia.
Pharmacopoeia.
Yeah, and that is, and I don't know how you say, is it Copaea? Who knows? And what that is it's a standard way to measure different pharmaceutical ingredients.
Yeah.
And so, for example, like, I don't know pharmaceutical things too much, but like, I'll take Tylenol. If I have a standard way to measure what is acetaminophen, and across multiple labs, we can all measure it the same way, we can make sure that the doses remain the same. It's like having inches versus centimeters, right? Like, let's all agree to measure things in inches, right? So it sets a standard that allows you to then measure things accurately. Well, magnesium bisglycinate is not in the USP, and so are a lot of supplements. So even if someone says, oh, yeah, we have ashwagandha in our supplement, and I don't know if ashwagandha is in USP or not, but even if they did, there's no standardized way to measure these ingredients and actually know what the content is. Because you could very easily have a one lab result that says, oh, it's 99% ashwagandha, and another one that says it's 62, because you measured it in different ways or you used a different test. And that is the crazy thing about the supplement industry, is that all these things that people are taking, sometimes you don't even know if what's in there is in there. Like, literally.
Yeah.
Not like some figurative, like, I don't know, article in a thing that is like, oh yeah, like, certain supplements don't have what they say they are. Like, no, they actually do not. No. No
Yes.
one knows. And so what's so fascinating to me is there are like certifying bodies, like I can't remember what it's called right now, but like, they say they like ISO and then like NSF and some of these, and they say that, and we haven't dug too deep into these yet, but they say that they test for purity, but there are literally no tests for purity of certain compounds that they are selling. So how are they testing for purity? They would do like a pretend test and actually measure just magnesium itself, right? They would, regardless of whether it's bisglycinate or oxide.
Yeah.
So anyway, we discovered that, and that was super interesting. And these tests are expensive, so I understand why people don't do them. So we go and we take the sample of the because we say we're going to make sure that we're going to use the 13 to 14%, because that's what's possible, right?
Yeah.
That's the one that's possible. And we send it to the lab to get tested. And do you remember its purity?
I remember it not being what we thought it was.
It was about like 80% pure. So the one, so we thought, like, okay, we thought the 20%, it can't be pure. And so that's maybe like 85-ish% pure. The 13 to 14% should be 100% magnesium bisglycinate. It was actually only 80%. And then that's when we went to the raw material suppliers. So we found some that were more local, like in North America. And if you're in the magnesium like space or like supplement space, you'll know that there's this one brand name, which is the gold standard of magnesium bisglycinate. It is the brand name. Everyone knows it. It's also like 3 to 4 times the cost. And the reason it's the brand name is because it's the most pure, it's the best, it's the highest quality, blah, blah, blah. And so we tested that one too. And that one actually had lower, it had a lower purity than the others. Because this is where we get into the something you touched on earlier, which is that magnesium bisglycinate starts out as magnesium oxide. It is reacted to bind the magnesium to the glycine molecules. The byproduct of that is magnesium oxide, or like there is not the byproduct, but like the leftover component. So that's why they call it magnesium bisglycinate fully reacted, or that's the idea. They call it fully reacted. So this name brand, very expensive raw material, magnesium bisglycinate, that supposedly is the best fully reacted one, but it was actually the lowest. And
Yeah.
when we tested it, and then we have the lab results and everything, so we can prove it and we'll show it. So then I checked with those raw material suppliers who are, they're located in North America, very reputable. And I say to them, can you show me your guys' test at the end of your batch? And she says to me, she goes, actually, just so you know, we can't guarantee the purity of each batch. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, each batch is a little bit different. Some are fully reacted, some are not. And I said, understood. So, okay, so I understand you do that differently. And I was like, how do you measure your magnesium bisglycinate? She says, oh yeah, we do it by an assay, which is just the test for just magnesium. And I was like, yes, but how do you know how much of it got converted from oxide to bisglycinate? How do you test the actual purity of magnesium bisglycinate? And she said, oh no, we don't do that. And I was like, what do you mean? You're the leaders. You guys charge 3 times the price. You say you're the best, and you don't know batch to batch how much magnesium bisglycinate you have? That's crazy.
That is crazy.
And so people are paying a ton of extra money for a product that isn't as pure, but it is a brand name. So that,
Yeah,
why do that?
that's wild.
So we did.
Which is sort of like, I mean, that's the impetus for why we decided that we should make it transparent and clear for our customers, like the third party independent tests that we're running. We're paying for them anyway, so we figured that they should be made as accessible as the magnesium itself, such that you know what you're taking and it's clear and transparent and easy to access.
Well, and that's the only way to solve the problem, because if we make a promise, a bold promise, and we say, hey, you can access the lab results, the independent lab results of every of our bottles, of the raw material, the microbial, the heavy metal, and that's linked to the batch. And
Or
we
that
tell you
specific
that
badge.
we tell you that loud and proud and boldly, and that becomes part of our brand, well then we have to live up to it, right? And that is the only way that a supplement company can actually be honest about what's in their bottle. That's the only way.
Yeah.
Because we tell we there's a company that shall remain unnamed, but
But
based
they
on
also care about transparency.
they care about transparency based on their name.
Yeah, it would
And
seem, yeah.
but
Which,
they're
I mean, in their defense, they are. It's just that their form of transparency is meaningless because
well, because if you look at it, and good on them, they do publish, and more companies are doing this, and I applaud that. They will publish their raw material, or they won't publish the raw material, but they will publish their microbial and their heavy metals. And then sometimes they will publish their like their lab results on purity, but not to the depth that's actually needed to actually validate what is in it, for one. And then two, so when companies do that, that is awesome. That should keep happening. And that's what we're planning on doing. And we believe that companies that are making supplements should do that. Period. The end. That's the standard. That should be the standard to exist. Like if you just want to exist in this world, that should be the standard. And but the thing is that some of these they're a little loose with like what is transparent and what is validating what's in it, because they'll publish things like certificates of composition. Now, a certificate of composition is about as useful as a certificate of analysis because it's made up. If it's from the manufacturer, for example. So let's say we're never going to do this with Aero, but let's say we did make a stack of like 7 different things. Then the manufacturer just creates a certificate saying, we certify it 7% this, 12% this, 10% this. They don't know. They have no idea. And so that's certifying what they think is in there, but it is not a lab result. It is not a something that is actually validating what is in there.
Yeah.
So it's, we believe it's a bit misleading, but everyone makes their own decisions about that, and it's not real transparency.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's, man, it costs more, it takes more time, and but it's what should be done. And I think that we're in a growing wave of people caring about transparency in what is going on with their supplements, or like anything they're putting in their body, like food transparency. So yeah, it's a very, very, very interesting world and scenario that we find ourselves in. I think one of the things that we want to do is to fix this is, and Jake, you've devised something cool, which is an NFC tag on every bottle, right?
Yeah, well, like I said, the idea is that somebody should, as easy as you can access the magnesium itself, you should also be able to access the paperwork, which verifies that the magnesium is what it says it is. The bottles, what's in the bottle is what is in front of the bottle on the label of the bottle. And so, yeah, with every bottle that we ship, a customer will be able to tap their phone on the top of the bottle and see those third-party independent test results.
Yeah, that actually validate that what's in it is like real, and not just not a, like a fake thing either. So we're like, part of that, and we touched on this a bit earlier, is like Aero as a brand is going to be very focused on science backed, simple, single ingredient supplements. We don't want to, because I think that one thing that people don't know is that any sort of like stacked supplement is very hard and very expensive to test. Like, I'm talking like some sort of like thing that's like, I don't know, supposed to, like the natural Ozempic or whatever, those different multivitamins and sleep stacks. Those things are very hard to test and very expensive, because what you'd have to do is you'd have to do what we did for our one single ingredient supplement, but you'd have to do it, let's say there's 7 ingredients in it, you'd have to do that times 7. And it
Yeah,
might even not be times 7, because you might need even more, because the amounts in each capsule or tablet or whatever are so small and undetectable. So the cost would be gargantuan. So if the cost is super high, and the certificate of analysis and the certificate of composition is probably made up, then what's in these stacks and in these supplements, what do you think about that? Do you think that's made up, or do you think that's real?
yeah.
Yeah, so it's like it's cray cray, like it's absolutely insane. Like, these, I don't think that anything that's in a stack can be what it says it actually is on the label. I don't think that's possible. It might be close to it, maybe, but that's kind of like always why I've thought of, with Aero, like, we're gonna be single ingredient supplements. That seemed simpler from like a manufacturing standpoint and a branding standpoint and all that stuff, but it turns out it's also like simpler, and the only thing that makes being able to test this way actually possible, right?
Yeah. Yeah, to be able to deliver what we know we want to deliver to the end consumer in terms of like efficacy and the quality of the product being delivered.
Yeah. So yeah, it's probably a good spot to wrap it there. Hey, Jake, like that, I think that tells most of the story.
Yeah, I think so. We're excited. We're excited to be back in the market and bringing a more transparent solution to people to promote health and wellness.
Yeah, and I think the more that we can standardize transparency and like share this message and share this story, the better for everyone. Because I think that if we're just like a tiny little force in this ecosystem that is like, hey, like, people should be more transparent, and here's how, about their supplements. If that forces the big guys to do it, and like I said, people can vote with their wallets, right? If you like our approach, you buy our product. And these other companies, if they have to adapt and they have to make their supply chains more transparent and more accountable, that could be a huge change, and that would be awesome for everyone who's taking supplements. They're gonna not be wasting their money. They're going to be spending their money with companies that are being honest about what they're providing. And if you're listening and you're curious about your own supplements, you should do a little bit of digging and ask companies for their test results and their data. And we'll share ours. We will, but it'll be interesting to know who will get back to you and who won't. And we do our best to get back to everyone. So, if you like what we're doing, make sure to share this pod with someone else. So I know that we went deep on this one. And you can check out our site, aerosupplements.com. Follow us on our socials. And, we're not here to freak you out, but we're here to say that, next time that you read a supplement label, you deserve the real story behind it. And that's what we're hoping to share with you guys on this journey.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks for joining.